What would happen to your deer kill rate if you left every piece of modern hunting technology in your truck and walked into the woods with nothing but a rifle, a knife, and 200 years of accumulated woodsmanship that the mountain men used to feed their families through winter? Because the 15 tricks I am about to walk through were standard practice for hunters who killed deer every single week without trail cameras, scent eliminators, GPS apps, or any product with a barcode. And the reason these tricks still work is that whitetail biology has not changed in 200 years. The deer your great-great-grandfather hunted had the same 297 million olfactory receptors, the same visual detection system, and the same behavioral patterns as the deer standing in your food plot right now. The technology changed, the deer did not. I started testing these old-school methods 6 seasons ago after reading a trapper's journal from the 1840s that described wind-reading techniques using spider webs and smoke from a smoldering punk stick. The trapper killed more deer per season than I have killed in the last decade, and he did it with a muzzleloader that took 45 seconds to reload. If you have an old hunting technique passed down from a grandfather or great-grandfather, I want to hear it. Stay until the end, because Trick 15 is a property mapping technique that mountain men use to predict deer movement across an entire valley, and it works better than any cellular camera network I have ever run. Number 1. Reading wind with natural indicators instead of commercial puffers. A spider web with morning dew on it shows you the wind direction from 30 yards away, roughly the distance from home plate to first base, without making a sound or producing a visible puff that the deer can see. The web moves with wind currents as light as 1 to 2 miles per hour, which is below the detection threshold of most commercial wind checkers. Mountain men watch spider webs, dandelion heads, and floating milkweed to read micro wind currents at specific points in the terrain rather than testing wind at their own position. The web 30 yards downwind of your stand tells you what the wind is doing where the deer will be, not where you are. I spent 3 seasons checking wind at my stand and wondering why deer still busted me at 40 yards. The wind at my stand was fine. The wind at the deer's position was swirling because of a terrain feature I could not feel from 20 feet up. Research from Penn State documented that wind direction can diverge by 20 to 45 degrees between 2 points separated by as little as 50 yards, roughly half a football field, in terrain with any topographic variation. Your wind checker tells you what the wind is doing at your face. The spider web tells you what it is doing at the deer. Number 2. Hunting the edge of bedding areas rather than the bedding area itself. Mountain men understood that a deer bedded in thick cover is nearly impossible to approach without detection, but a deer transitioning between bedding and feeding follows a predictable edge, which is the boundary where thick bedding cover meets open feeding habitat. They set up 40 to 60 yards off the bedding edge, roughly the length of a bowling lane, on the downwind side of the transition zone where deer emerged into thinner cover and were momentarily vulnerable. A buddy who guides in western North Carolina, that steep Blue Ridge Mountain and Laurel Thicket country between Waynesville and Brevard, where the rhododendron understory is so dense that visibility drops to 5 yards inside the bedding cover, runs every client hunt on the bedding edge rather than deep timber or open fields. His clients average 3.4 deer sightings per sit on edge setups versus 1.1 sightings per sit on field edge setups. The mountain men figured out what modern stand placement theory confirms. The edge is where the deer are killable. Number 3. Interpreting rut sign to predict buck movement 48 hours ahead. A fresh rub, which is a spot where a buck has scraped his antlers against a tree trunk, removing the bark and leaving exposed white wood, tells you a buck was in that location recently. But a cluster of 3 or more rubs within 50 yards of each other, roughly half a football field, oriented in the same direction on the tree trunks, tells you the buck is traveling that direction repeatedly and will be back within 24 to 48 hours if the rut phase has not shifted. Mountain men read rub lines, which are a series of rubs along a buck's travel route, the way a tracker reads footprints. The direction of the rubbing, the height of the rub on the tree indicating the buck's body size, and the freshness of the exposed wood told them where the buck was going, how big he was, and when he had last passed. A rub with bright white wood and sap still wet was made within 12 hours. A rub with dried sap and darkening wood was 3 or more days old. I tested this on my southern Iowa property, that rolling crop field and hardwood timber country between Centerville and Bloomfield, where the Appanoose County timber draws hold some of the densest mature buck populations in the Midwest, by hunting fresh rub lines exclusively during the pre-rut. My stealth cam at $60 confirmed that the buck responsible for 3 of the 4 rub lines I hunted returned to the rub line within 48 hours of when I found the fresh rubs. Quick pause here. Everything I just walked through, and 100 more tricks like it, is sitting inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition. 280 pages of the stuff that actually puts deer on the ground. And right now, if you grab it, I am throwing in the 30-day opening day roadmap completely free. That is a 60-page day-by-day preseason plan that walks you from the first scout to opening morning, so you start this season ahead of every other hunter in the woods. Link in the description, QR code on screen. This is the season you stop guessing. Number 4. Predicting thermal wind movement in mountain terrain. Mountain men knew that warm air rises uphill in the morning, as the sun heats the east-facing slopes, and cool air sinks downhill in the evening, as the ridgetops lose heat first. This thermal pattern, which is the vertical air movement caused by temperature differences between the valley floor and the ridgetop, means your scent goes uphill in the morning and downhill in the evening, regardless of what the prevailing wind is doing. Hunt above the deer in the morning. Hunt below the deer in the evening. I ignored thermals for 20 seasons because I hunted flat ground where they barely matter. The first season I hunted hill country in western NC, I got busted on 3 consecutive morning sits because my scent was riding the morning thermal uphill directly into the bedding area above me. A 1978 article from Outdoor Life by a Virginia mountain hunter described the exact same thermal pattern and the fix. Sit above the bedding in the morning, so the thermal carries your scent uphill and away from the deer below you. The reversal happens roughly 30 to 45 minutes after sunrise, when the sun hits the east-facing slope and the air begins rising. If you are set up below a bedding area on a west-facing slope that the sun has not hit yet, you get a window of falling cold air carrying your scent downhill, away from the deer above you, until the sun warms your slope and the thermal flips. That window is your best hunting. Once the thermal flips and starts rising, your scent goes straight uphill into the bedding. Get down or get busted. I overstayed that window once and watched a doe 80 yards uphill snap her head up, test the air, and blow 3 times at 9:15 a.m. The thermal had flipped and I was still sitting there thinking I had more time. Number 5. Detecting doe estrus by reading buck behavior rather than buying commercial scent. Mountain men did not buy doe estrus at $18 per bottle from Tinks, or $22 per bottle from Code Blue. They watched the bucks. A buck with his nose to the ground, walking in a straight line with his head low and his neck extended, is trailing a hot doe. That straight line behavior is called trailing, and it tells you a doe in estrus, which is the 24 to 36 hour breeding window when the doe is receptive, is somewhere ahead of that buck. Set up between the buck's direction of travel and the nearest thick cover, because the doe he is trailing is almost always heading towards security cover. Number 6. Reading rub size to estimate buck body and antler mass. A rub on a tree trunk 2 to 3 inches in diameter, roughly the width of a broom handle, was made by a small buck. A rub on a trunk 4 to 6 inches in diameter, roughly the width of a coffee can, was made by a mature buck with enough body mass and antler size to damage a tree that size. Mountain men used rub diameter as a census tool. They could estimate how many mature bucks used an area by counting the large diameter rubs on a walkthrough. Research from the Quality Deer Management Association confirmed that rub diameter correlates with buck age class at a statistically significant rate, with bucks 3.5 years and older responsible for roughly 80% of rubs on trees 4 inches or larger in diameter. Number 7. Mapping where trails converge to find the highest traffic stand locations. Mountain men looked for the spot where 3 or more deer trails merged into a single path. That convergence point, often called a pinch point, which is a narrow strip of cover that forces deer from multiple directions into a single travel lane, is the highest traffic location in any piece of timber. The convergence tells you that deer from multiple bedding areas are all using the same route to reach a food source, water source, or terrain crossing. I found a convergence point on my Iowa property where 4 trails merged into a single crossing through a barbed wire fence gap 3 feet wide, roughly the width of a doorway. My Moultrie at $70 photographed 23 unique deer using that gap in a single week during the pre-rut. Look, I am going to be straight with you. Everything I am walking through in this video is just a small piece of what is inside the Buck Hunter's Bible 2026 edition. 280 pages, 101 field-tested tricks, and right now, you also get the 30-day opening day roadmap free with it. A 60-page day-by-day plan that gets you ready before the season even starts. I do not know how long that bonus stays in the deal, but if you have been watching these videos and thinking this could be my season, that is the move. Link in the description below, QR code on screen. Make this the year. Number 8. Positioning near water during early season heat. Mountain men hunted water sources in September, the way modern hunters hunt food plots in November. When daytime temperatures are above 70 degrees Fahrenheit, deer increase water intake by roughly 50% compared to cooler conditions, because the metabolic heat generated by digesting high-protein summer browse requires additional water for thermoregulation. Research from Auburn University documented that whitetails visit water sources an average of 3 to 4 times per 24-hour period, during temperatures above 75 degrees compared to 1 to 2 visits below 50 degrees. A stand within 40 yards of a reliable water source, roughly the distance from home plate to second base, during early September heat, produces encounter rates that rival November rut sits. I ran a Browning Strike Force at $80 over a cattle tank on my Rolling Plains TX property during September. The camera logged 19 unique deer visits per day during a week when daytime highs exceeded 95 degrees. The same camera on a food plot 400 yards away, roughly 4 football fields, logged 6 visits per day during the same period. The water source outperformed the food plot by roughly 3 to 1 in total visitation during extreme heat. The mountain men did not need a camera to figure this out. They sat near water in the heat and killed deer. I needed $80 worth of camera data to confirm what they knew 200 years ago. Number 9. Predicting acorn mast crop quality by reading the trees in July rather than waiting for the drop in October. Mountain men looked at the canopy in midsummer. A white oak with heavy acorn clusters visible from the ground in July will drop a strong mast crop in October. A white oak with sparse or absent clusters will produce a poor crop. This 3-month advance warning told them exactly which ridge or hollow would hold deer in the fall. I started scouting canopy in July, 3 seasons ago, and the correlation between heavy July clusters and October deer concentration has been consistent every year. The ridge with heavy white oak mast pulls deer off the surrounding 200 acres like a magnet. White oaks produce acorns with lower tannin content, which are bitter phenolic compounds that reduce palatability, compared to red oaks. Research from Mississippi State University's Deer Lab documented that whitetails select white oak acorns over red oak acorns at a ratio of roughly 3 to 1 when both are available, because the lower tannin concentration makes white oak acorns more digestible and more palatable. The mountain men knew which oaks the deer preferred without knowing the chemistry. They just watched where the deer fed and learned that certain trees on certain ridges pulled more deer than others. The tannin chemistry explains the preference. The observation confirms it. Number 10. Identifying pressure points where other hunters push deer onto your property. Mountain men who hunted near other trappers learned quickly that human activity pushes deer into the areas with the least disturbance. They set up on the receiving end of the pressure. The same principle works on modern hunting leases. If the property next to yours has 6 hunters who drive ATVs to their stands every morning, the mature bucks on their side are relocating to your side during daylight. Set up within 200 yards of the property line, roughly 2 football fields, on the downwind side of the most likely crossing point, and let your neighbor's pressure work for you. A buddy on the rolling plains of Texas, that flat mesquite and prickly pear country between Abilene and San Angelo, where the ranch properties run 2,000 to 10,000 acres, and the deer concentrate along senderos, which are cleared shooting lanes cut through the brush, told me his best buck in 8 seasons came from a stand 150 yards from his neighbor's fence line on opening morning of rifle season. The neighbor's crew drove 4 trucks to their stands at dawn. A 160 class 10-point crossed the fence at 7:22 a.m. and walked past his stand at 30 yards. Number 11. Predicting escape routes by reading terrain with your eyes rather than with a GPS. A deer that is alarmed always runs toward the thickest available cover via the shortest route that keeps a visual barrier between it and the threat. Mountain men position themselves between the deer and the escape route rather than between the deer and the food source. On a hillside, the escape route is almost always downhill toward the creek bottom where the cover is thickest. On flat ground, the escape route leads to the nearest standing timber or dense brush patch. I tested this by hanging 2 stands on the same trail on my Iowa property, one between the food source and the deer's approach direction, and one between the trail and the escape cover on the opposite side. The escape route stand produced 40% more shot opportunities because the deer that spotted me from the food side stand ran directly away from me toward their escape cover. The deer that spotted me from the escape route stand ran toward me for the first 3 to 4 seconds before angling around my position, which gave me a brief window that the other setup never provided. The mountain men understood this instinctively. Position yourself between the deer and where it wants to go when it is scared, not between the deer and where it came from. Number 12. Scent control with native materials instead of $15 per can commercial sprays. Mountain men crushed pine needles, cedar boughs, and wild sage to mask their scent on entry routes. The volatile terpene compounds in pine and cedar, specifically alpha-pinene and beta-pinene, produce a strong natural scent that overwhelms the human volatile fatty acids, specifically isovaleric acid and butyric acid, deposited on vegetation during the walk-in. I tested a crushed pine needle boot rub against dead downwind scent spray at $14 per can on alternating sits during one season. My detection rate, meaning the percentage of sits where a deer visually or olfactorily detected me, was roughly the same on both methods. The pine needles cost 0 BOS. The spray cost $14 per can. Number 13. Stand placement based on deer psychology rather than deer sightings. Mountain men placed themselves where deer felt safe, not where deer were most visible. A deer that feels safe moves slowly, browses casually, and presents longer shot windows. A deer crossing an open field moves fast, scans constantly, and offers a 3-second window. The safest spots are inside timber edges, within 10 yards of thick cover, roughly the distance from the free throw line to the basket, where the deer's escape route is short and its stress level is low. I moved 3 stands from field edges to timber interiors, and my average time in range per deer encounter went from roughly 8 seconds to roughly 35 seconds. Number 14. Entering from the direction deer do not expect predators. Mountain men approached from water. They waded creeks, walked stream beds, and entered hunting areas from the direction that carried 0 ground scent because moving water washed their trail. The modern version is walking a creek bed to your stand rather than a ridge trail. A creek bed entry deposits scent on water and wet rock that dissipates within minutes rather than on dry leaves and soil that hold scent for hours. I switched to creek bed entries on 2 of my stands, and the frequency of deer detecting me on entry dropped from roughly 1 in 4 sits to roughly 1 in 12. The creek bed also masks the sound of your footsteps. Wet gravel and water produce a consistent ambient noise that blends with the natural sound of flowing water rather than the sharp crunch of dry leaves that broadcast your location to every deer within 100 yards, roughly the length of a football field. Research from the University of Georgia documented that whitetails can detect the sound of a human footstep on dry leaves at distances up to 80 yards and distinguish it from animal movement by the cadence and weight pattern. A creek bed entry eliminates both the scent trail and the sound signature simultaneously. The mountain men knew this. I spent 25 years walking through crunchy leaves before I figured it out. Number 15. The Ancestral Hunting Grounds Map. Mountain men mapped deer movement across entire valleys by observing where deer concentrated during each phase of the season: spring greenup, summer water, early fall mast, rut travel, and late winter thermal cover. They built a mental map that told them exactly where to be during each 2-week window of the year. The modern version is a hand-drawn property map updated annually with kill dates, rubline locations, scrape clusters, and mast crop quality ratings for each section of timber. After 5 years, that map shows you seasonal patterns that no trail camera can reveal, because the map tracks time, location, and food source quality together across years. My 6-year map shows that the southeast corner of my Iowa property produces the best rut phase buck activity in years, when the white oak mast crop is poor on the north ridge, which pushes the does south toward the remaining red oak mast and pulls the bucks with them. No camera told me that. The map told me that because the map connects variables that cameras photograph in isolation. If you have a mountain man trick I did not cover, leave it below. Next time we are covering the 5 water source setups that outperform food plot stands in early season. The mountain men did not have trail cameras. They did not have scent sprays. They did not have GPS apps telling them where to sit. They had eyes, ears, patience, and 200 years of accumulated knowledge about how deer behave in the terrain they hunted every day. The guys who know these tricks do not talk about them at deer camp because they sound too simple to be real. Spider webs for wind, pine needles for scent, creek beds for entry. But these tricks filled tags when all the technology in the world did not exist. And they still work because the deer have not changed. You have. The question is whether you are willing to listen.